The line that started it was set at the Prescott Feed and Supply on a Tuesday morning in March. Joanne Torrance was loading 50-pound bags of mineral supplement into the bed of her truck when Hank Culberson walked past with his coffee and said, loud enough for the 3 other men on the loading dock to hear, 20 bulls and no cows. That woman's running a bachelor party, not a ranch. The men laughed. Joanne heard it. She didn't turn around. She finished loading the mineral, signed the receipt, and drove home to the 60-acre property she'd been running alone for 7 years outside of Chino Valley, Arizona, in the high desert grassland between Prescott and the Verde Valley. She'd heard worse. In 7 years of running an operation that nobody in Yavapai County understood, she'd been called crazy, stubborn, divorced, and delusional, and her personal favorite, the bull lady, which people said with the same tone they'd use for the cat lady, except with animals that weighed 1,200 pounds and could put you through a fence. Joanne was 59. She'd been married to a man named Dwight for 22 years. Dwight had run cattle in the Verde Valley his whole life. Commercial cows, straightforward cow-calf operation, the kind of ranching that everybody understood because everybody did it. When Dwight died of pancreatic cancer in 2017 at 61, Joanne inherited 3 things: 60 acres of deeded land, $140,000 in debt, and the opinion of every rancher in the county that she should sell the cattle, sell the property, and move into town. She did not move into town. She sold the cattle. That part was true. She couldn't run a cow-calf operation alone on 60 acres with the debt Dwight had accumulated. The cows went through the Prescott livestock auction in January of 2018. The checks covered about 1/3 of what she owed. But she didn't sell the land. And she didn't stop ranching. She changed what ranching meant. Joanne had an idea that Dwight would have hated. Not because it was bad, because it was different. And Dwight, God rest him, was a man who did things the way his father did them and his grandfather before that, and considered deviation from that path to be a character flaw. Joanne's idea was bulls. Not breeding bulls, not herd sires, development bulls. The concept was simple and almost nobody in Yavapai County was doing it. Every cow-calf operation in the West needs bulls. A good 2-year-old registered breeding bull costs between $3,000 and $8,000, depending on breed, genetics, and the seller's opinion of himself. Most ranchers buy those bulls at sales or from seed stock producers who raise them on grain-heavy rations in feedlot-style pens. Joanne's plan was to buy bull calves at weaning, 8 months old, 400 to 500 pounds, registered stock from good programs, for $600 to $900 each, then develop them on grass. No grain, no feedlot pen. Natural growth on Arizona rangeland for 12 to 14 months until they reached breeding age and weight. Then sell them as range-ready 2-year-olds for $3,000 to $5,000 each. The margin was significant. Buy at $700, sell at $4,000. Cost of grass, mineral, vaccination, and the year of management in between, roughly $800 per head. Net profit per bull, $2,500, times 20 bulls, $50,000 a year, on 60 acres. With one person, no employees, no equipment beyond what Dwight had left in the barn. The math worked on paper. The problem was that nobody believed the paper. 20 young bulls on 60 acres, her neighbor Roy Desmond said when she told him the plan. You're going to have bulls going through fences, fighting each other, and destroying everything you own. There's a reason people don't keep 20 bulls together, Joanne. Roy wasn't wrong about the conventional wisdom. Bulls in groups are supposed to be aggressive. They establish hierarchies, they fight, they break fences. They're harder to handle than cows because they're bigger, stronger, and have testosterone levels that make questionable decisions a lifestyle. But Joanne had observed something during Dwight's years that Dwight himself had never noticed. The bulls they'd raised on grass, the ones that grew up on pasture instead of in a pen, were calmer than the ones they bought from feedlot-style programs. Lower stress, less fighting, more social behavior. They moved together like a herd instead of circling each other like fighters. The difference was the diet. Grain-fed bulls have higher energy intake, which translates to higher testosterone expression, which translates to more aggressive behavior. Grass-fed bulls develop more slowly, carry moderate body condition, and express testosterone at levels that support breeding without the behavioral intensity that makes them dangerous in groups. It was basic endocrinology, but nobody in Yavapai County was applying it to a business model. Joanne bought her first group of 10 bull calves in the fall of 2018, registered Hereford and Angus from 3 different programs in northern Arizona, paid an average of $720 each, turned them out on her 60 acres of native blue grama and side oats grama, the hardy, drought-adapted grasses that survive on 14 inches of annual rainfall and don't complain about the heat. The calves settled in. No fighting, no fence breaking. They grazed together, moved together, bedded together at night in the draw on the east side of the property where the terrain blocked wind and the grass was thickest. By the following fall, the 10 bulls were 14 months old, averaging 1,100 pounds, and showing the kind of bone and muscling that comes from slow growth on good grass. 3 ranchers in Yavapai County bought 5 of them at $3,800 each. 2 operations in Coconino County bought 3 more at $3,200. Lower price because Joanne had no track record and they wanted a discount for the risk. The last 2 sold to a ranch in Mojave County at $2,800 each. Total revenue, $34,200, minus $7,200 in purchase cost, minus $8,000 in operating costs, mineral, vaccination, fencing repair, vet checks, net profit, $19,000 on her first cycle. Not $50,000, not yet. She'd started with 10, not 20, and her sale price was below target because she had no reputation and no track record. But the model worked. Year 2, she bought 20 calves. Year 3, 20 again. By year 4, Joanne Torrance was selling developed bulls to operations across 4 counties, and the men at the Prescott Feed and Supply had stopped laughing and started asking questions. Not to her face, of course, to each other. In the way that men ask questions when admitting curiosity feels like admitting they were wrong. How's she doing it? How's she keeping 20 bulls together without them killing each other? What's she feeding them? The answers were simple: grass, mineral, space, and the understanding that bulls raised on grass behave differently than bulls raised on grain. Not magic. Just biology that nobody had bothered to test because everybody assumed the conventional wisdom was the last word. But the bulls did something else on Joanne's property that she didn't plan and couldn't explain. Starting in the 2nd year, Joanne noticed that the bulls spent an unusual amount of time in one specific area of the property. The southwest corner, a sloping section of rocky ground covered in sparse juniper and rabbit brush that Joanne had always considered the worst 60 feet on the property. Poor grass, thin soil, the kind of ground that doesn't justify fencing. But the bulls went there, every day, sometimes all 20 of them, clustered in an area no bigger than half an acre. They'd stand there for hours, not grazing. There was almost nothing to graze, not seeking shade. The juniper was too sparse for real cover. Just standing, heads low, occasionally pawing the ground. Joanne mentioned it to her vet, Dr. Patricia Holgan out of Prescott. Patricia came out, watched the bulls for an hour, checked them for signs of PISA, the mineral deficiency behavior where cattle eat dirt or chew rocks to get nutrients their diet is missing. Mineral panels came back clean, no deficiency. They're not looking for minerals, Patricia said. They're looking for something else. What? I don't know. But 20 bulls don't stand in the same 60-foot circle for no reason. Something's in that ground that's pulling them there. Joanne watched the bulls for another 2 weeks. The pattern held. Every day, between 10 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon, the hottest hours, the bulls would migrate to the southwest corner and stand in the same area. Their hooves churned the thin soil. Their weight compacted the surface. Over months of this concentrated impact, the ground in that area began to change. The rocky surface broke apart. Sediment shifted. Small depressions formed where the soil had been displaced by thousands of hoof impacts. In November of the 3rd year, after the summer monsoon season had dropped 6 inches of rain across Yavapai County, Joanne walked to the southwest corner to check the fencing and stepped in a puddle that shouldn't have been there. Not a rain puddle. Rain puddles in Arizona evaporate within hours in November. This puddle was 3 days old, She'd seen it from the house the day before and assumed it was runoff. But runoff doesn't last 3 days on sloped ground in the desert. She knelt down, put her hand in the water. It was cold, noticeably colder than the air temperature, and it was moving. Not flowing, but seeping, pushing up through a crack in the rocky substrate that the bull's hooves had exposed over months of concentrated traffic. Joanne called Patricia. Patricia called a friend at the Yavapai County Water Resources Office. The friend sent a hydrologist named Ben Kessler. Ben arrived on a Saturday morning. He brought probes and sampling equipment and the casual skepticism of a man who'd been chasing water in Arizona for 20 years and had learned that most springs people reported were seasonal seeps that lasted a week. He tested the flow. He tested the water quality. He measured the temperature differential between the seep water and the ambient groundwater table. What he found made him drive back to Prescott, pull historical geological surveys, and return the following Monday with maps that Joanne had never seen. "Mrs. Torrance," Ben said, spreading a geological survey across the hood of his truck, "your property sits on the edge of a fault zone that runs from the Bradshaw Mountains southeast toward the Verde Valley. This fault historically produced springs. Several are documented in surveys from the 1890s. But most of them were sealed over the last century by sediment accumulation, surface compaction, and the decline of large animal traffic that used to keep the soil above them disturbed." He pointed at the seep. "Your bulls broke the seal. Their concentrated hoof impact in this area fractured the compacted surface layer and the cemented sediment beneath it. The water was always there. The geology didn't change. Your bulls just opened the door." Joanne looked at the water seeping through the crack. Cold, clean, moving. How much water? Ben had measured the flow at approximately 2 gallons per minute. That's 120 gallons an hour, almost 3,000 gallons a day. In a county where residential wells were producing 2 to 5 gallons per minute and dropping every year as the aquifer declined. A natural spring producing 2 gallons per minute was not trivial. "That's enough to water your entire operation," Ben said, and then some. Joanne stood over the seep that 20 bulls had uncovered by doing nothing more than standing in the same spot every day for 2 years. Water that had been trapped under a century of accumulated sediment, released by hooves. She thought about Dwight, about what he would have said if she'd told him that 20 bulls on 60 acres would uncover a spring. He would have said, "That's not how it works, Joanne. You don't find water with bulls. You find water with a well driller and a check you can't afford." But the water was there, and the bulls had found it. Not with a drill. With their feet. Because something in the ground, moisture, temperature, mineral content, pulled them to that spot every day until their weight opened what a century of silence had closed. The drought came the following summer. Not unusual for Arizona. But this one was worse than average. May through September with less than 2 inches of rainfall across Yavapai County. Wells dropped, stock ponds dried. Ranchers who depended on seasonal runoff to fill their tanks had nothing to fill them with. Roy Desmond, the neighbor who'd said she was running a bachelor party, lost his stock pond in July. 300 acres and no water for 40 cows. He was hauling water in a 1,500-gallon tank on a flatbed trailer from a hydrant in Chino Valley, 16 miles round trip, 3 times a week. The cost was eating his calf check before the calves were weaned. Joanne's spring was producing 2.5 gallons per minute by then. The flow had increased after the second monsoon season opened additional fractures in the substrate. She had more water than her 20 bulls could drink. She drove to Roy's place on a Saturday morning. Roy was unloading water from the tank into a stock trough. His shirt was soaked with sweat. His face had the expression of a man doing math he couldn't make work. "Roy," Joanne said, "I've got water." He looked at her. His expression shifted from exhaustion to wariness. The wariness of a man who'd laughed at a woman publicly at a feed store and was now being offered something he needed by the same woman. What kind of water? A spring. On my southwest corner. The bulls uncovered it. I've got more than I can use. I can pipe it to the fence line and you can run a line to your stock trough from there. Roy stared at her. "How much?" Joanne looked at him. "No charge, Roy. You're my neighbor." That's how this works. Roy didn't say anything for a while. His jaw was doing the thing that jaws do when a man is chewing on something that isn't food. Joanne, I said some things at the feed store about you and the bulls. It wasn't right. I know what you said. I was loading mineral 10 feet away. I'm sorry. Joanne nodded. Apology accepted. Now do you want the water or not? Roy took the water. Joanne ran 1,000 feet of 2-inch poly pipe from the spring to the fence line. Roy connected it to his system. His 40 cows drank from water that 20 bulls had found by standing in a circle on the worst 60 feet of a property that everyone said was too small for what Joanne was doing. 2 other neighbors connected that summer. Joanne didn't charge any of them. The spring was producing enough. And in Yavapai County, in Arizona, in the desert west, where water is the difference between staying and leaving, sharing water is the thing you do that defines who you are for the rest of your life. By fall, the drought broke, the monsoons returned, the stock ponds filled. Roy's cows were fine, the neighbors' cattle were fine, and Joanne's 20 bulls were standing in the southwest corner the way they always did. Heads low, hooves working the ground, maintaining the flow that nobody knew was there until they showed everybody where to look. Ben Kessler published a technical report through the County Water Resources Office documenting the spring's emergence. He titled it Livestock Impact and Spring Reactivation on Tertiary Fault Zones in the Bradshaw Mountain Foothills. The report included flow data, water quality analysis, geological cross-sections, and a recommendation that other sealed historical springs in the region be evaluated for potential reactivation through targeted animal impact. Nobody at the Prescott Feed and Supply made jokes about Joanne after that summer. Not because she'd proven them wrong, because she'd given them water when they needed it and hadn't asked for anything in return. In ranch country, that settles accounts faster than any argument. Hank Culberson, the man who'd made the bachelor party comment, bought 2 developed bulls from Joanne the following March, drove to her property, wrote a check, looked at the spring flowing from the ground in the southwest corner with 20 bulls standing around it. He stood there for a while, then said, "I've been ranching this county for 30 years. Never seen a spring come out of that hillside." Joanne was filling a water trough. It wasn't there before. The bulls brought it. Hank looked at the bulls, then at Joanne, then at the water. "I owe you more than an apology. You don't owe me anything, but if you want to keep buying bulls that do what grain-fed bulls can't do, you know where to find them." Hank almost smiled, the kind of smile that men produce when they're acknowledging something they should have acknowledged years ago. Joanne runs 22 bulls now. Her operation is the only bull development program in Yavapai County. She sells 15 to 18 breeding bulls per year to operations across northern Arizona. Her reputation travels the way water travels in the desert, slowly, through cracks, following the path of least resistance until it reaches everywhere it needs to go. The spring produces year-round, 3 gallons per minute now. The flow increases slightly after monsoon season and decreases slightly in May, but it never stops. A century of sealed water, opened by the hooves of animals that everybody said she shouldn't be keeping. Joanne visits Dwight's grave in Prescott twice a year. She doesn't talk to him the way some people talk to graves. She just stands there for a few minutes and thinks about what he'd say if he could see the operation now. He'd probably say, "That's not how it works, Joanne." And she'd probably say, "I know, sweetheart, but it does." The bulls stand in the southwest corner every afternoon. Same spot, same circle, same behavior that puzzled Joanne and her vet, and the hydrologist, and everybody who looked at 20 animals standing on bad ground for no visible reason. The reason was under their feet the whole time, and the woman who everybody laughed at was standing on it too. She just needed the bulls to show her where.